It's great to be here today with you all. So I try to have a title, Captivating Crowds of Cicadas. I try to think of C words. Natural History of the Cicadae. Professor of Biology, I know most of the folks here and like to talk about the different things, and pretty exciting as we look at these in general. So they're not locusts. So this actually goes back to when the Europeans came to the New World, and these periodical cicadas were new, but they knew there was plagues of locusts tied to biblical times. So that terminology and the misname has gone on for decades and centuries. I remember in the 1980s that I just called them locusts. I remember the annual cicadas in Central Illinois, and we'd collect some of the shells or the exoskeletons, and we get kind of a little creeped out because we grabbed one that's actually didn't come out yet. But I remember to this day, I'd take them and put them in brown paper bags, and I just put them in our mailbox right in front of the house, and it caused all these black flies to go in the house, and I got in real big trouble. So, back in the day, 40 years ago, we didn't have all the technology we played with, ran around outside and collect those cicada shells. We did call them locusts, but locusts are the swarming phases of grasshoppers and relatives and things like that. So they are not locusts, even though we call them the 13-year locusts, 17-year locusts, but it's like anything, they have their correct names, like saying American goldfinch, we'll call them wild canaries. So there's that, some folks will call them different things. So they're not locusts, they're not these things up here. The cicadas are insects that belong to the order Hemiptera, true bugs, the suborder Ornithorynca. They share that with hoppers, I believe spittlebugs, some other things in there. Underneath that order, they belong to the superfamily Cicoideae, which you think of cicadas and some close relatives. And then the family Cicadidae. So in biology and animals, DAE will indicate the family they belong to. We're Hominidae. Your dog belongs to Canidae. Your cat's Felidae. Cicadas are Cicadidae. So I've seen different numbers, 3,200 species, some 4,000, 5,000. They're found on all continents except Antarctica. Approximately 200 species in North America. That number can vary. But basically the two groups we think of are the annual and the periodical cicadas. So the periodical cicadas, two of them shown right there. Cicadas in general, this is another one, but most insects have four wings. So these have four membranous wings, membrane or membranous there. And this is another, the periodical cicada. Good picture there. Some of these things are on the internet, but just interesting all of this. When you scrape the surface, there's just so much information to learn. It's pretty amazing. These are the annual dog day cicadas we call. They have short antennae. They have the two compound eyes. Those are those big looking eyes you think of the bug eyes. But they have three simple eyes. And you can see the three little simple eyes right there in the middle, ocelli. And that's kind of to tell light differences. But the compound eyes are those big eyes you think on the side of the head. And cicadas just in general, when you pick them up, they're kind of scary. They're big insects, but they're pretty much harmless. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts that feed underground on plant roots. So you can see that proboscis coming there. The feed mostly is a nymph. And anything that's true bugs will have piercing, sucking mouth parts. They can plant sap, they can suck on insects, but these guys will actually plant sap. And some of their long life, as we look at the periodical ones and even the annual ones, some of their long life may be because of poor diet of xylem sap. So that's a lot of the xylem, the food and the nutrients coming up in the tree. Probably not a lot of protein. So when they're just maybe eating that sugar water, there's some theories that, or hypotheses that they grow slow because if that's all you eat, you're not going to grow very fast. So cicadas do a type of development called hemimetabolous. So cicadas, roaches, grasshoppers. So you're never going to find a caterpillar cicada or a grasshopper cicada. Sorry, a grasshopper caterpillar. Those caterpillar larval stages are for like butterflies, flies, things like that. These do this hemimetabolous development. You have an adult, lays the eggs, then they have the nymph, then they can go through molts and have the adult. This is also called gradual, half change, incomplete. So the nymphs are what you see, those shells, those exoskeletons here. So they look a lot like the adults versus like you think a caterpillar to a butterfly goes through holometabolous. So they go through this half change. So the family Cicadae, so looking at cicadas in general, this was kind of new. I always kind of thought the adults didn't feed, but they can feed on trees and woody shrubs, but they're mostly feeding as the nymphal younger stages underground. Females will insert their eggs into twigs, and sometimes inserting those twigs can cause flagging and kill those edges of those branches. If that flagging doesn't occur, I think the egg success is greater, but it actually I've learned that can maybe benefit the tree somewhat. They can kind of help them in self-pruning a little bit. The eggs hatch out of those twigs, the small little tiny nymphs fall to the ground and burrow. The nymphs can remain in the ground and they grow and go through molts. And they get bigger. And the last molt, usually the fifth one, is when it crawls out of the ground and then it's going to go through the molt and that half metamorphosis. And you can see this one that's coming out here. The wings have not yet filled with fluid, but this was actually taken by Misty Gish, another biology instructor at OCTC. These are the annual cicadas we just saw on the front lakeside, and you can see 3 actually in the picture. So she gave me permission to use her pictures there. So these are cicadas in general. Sounds, primarily singing during the day. Both sexes can hear, but we're going to learn where they hear. But only males make sounds to attract mates. So if you get one in your house that's making a racket, it probably is a male because a female is not going to be making the noise. Male cicadas can congregate in large groups and call together to attract females. We know animals are doing the calling basically so they can mate, reproduce. We think of all our birds, they're doing that same thing. So the sounds are really interesting. They produce, when we look at these words, timbals and tympanum. You know, I love music as just as much as science. You think of the timpani, those big drums in the orchestra. So it's kind of similar to that. This is the left side of a cicada here, and they make their noise with the early front part of that abdomen, and they hear with that front part of the abdomen as well. So it has nothing to do with their face. It's on the abdomen. So imagine cutting cross-section of that insect, and this is the front of the abdomen. The thoracic area would be up closer, but this is that front look of that abdomen. So the tymbals here on the side are here, and it's a protein called resilin, and it's like these ribs that click. And then there's muscles that are moving it back and forward, and that's causing that noise. And what I've been reading, that noise can even come out this tympanum, and that's their eardrum that they're hearing. So in this huge air space, you know, so you think about individual, how loud they can be, and then they can just send it out, this tympanum. So that's their ear, but the sound can come out there. The timbal is making that noise, and the males have a large air space. Females don't have the air space, they don't have the timbals, but they do have the tympanum, but that's actually filled with eggs. So it's pretty amazing as we're looking at those. And at the end, if I don't forget, I've got some cicadas people have given to me. They're the annual cicadas, and you can see some of the differences between males and females. So,
Whoa.
go ahead. You have a question?
No,
Oh, no. Okay.
I'm just
Sorry.
amazed.
Okay, it's pretty interesting. I've learned, you know, a lot about these. So the annual dog day cicadas. So you know that feeling that when you know you're late summer or you're going back to school, you're I remember, I think last year you heard it in June. It's kind of it's a fun feeling because you know fall's coming, and we don't hear it now. But it's the annual dog day cicadas, and I was looking at this. The dog day has to do with Sirius and astrology. So off of Orion's belt, you go down to the left. There's Sirius. I think it's Sirius. And that actually tracks with the sun, and you don't see it. So I think a good part of that summer, during the dog days, the sun is in front of that star, is what I've understood. And we're calling the dog days of summer. We hear that, and I think there's new song my daughter's listened to is like "The Dog Days Are Over." I forget who the artist actually is, but it's a new one that's out. But the annual dog day cicadas. There's one emerging here. They're large, blackish, greenish. That's what I have here today. This is what you see. You're going to see that in late summer and fall. They emerge in late summer every year. But annual's not a great name because it's not, they have a 1-year life cycle. It's kind of like our corn crops. It's not annual. We don't plant, it's not 12 months. You know, it's a certain part of that year. Here, they can live 4 to 7 years. It depends on that species. But the years overlap, but there's always some coming out every single late summer and fall. So it's not like those periodical, but annual, I thought they'd go through the whole life cycle, but they don't. They could be 4 years, 7 years, and the generations overlap. You can see the antenna coming up on the head on that one a little bit. So I threw this in here. I'm not an expert on cicada killer wasps, but you'll see these. These are wasps, they belong to Hymenoptera. They're pretty big, they're pretty intimidating. You'll see them getting nectar, but the female will get a cicada. So right down here, there's a cicada killer wasp, and she will get a cicada, and either she'll save the sting actually for that cicada, then take it underground and leave an egg in it, and it'll go through its life cycle feeding on that or a few cicadas. So I've got to do a little research. Either that cicada's dead or paralyzed. I guess it really doesn't matter. It's going to be eaten. But when you see those cicada killer wasps at flowers, they're pretty intimidating. You really don't want to touch them, but what I've read, it's hard to get them to sting, but you don't really want to touch them anyway. But they're just pretty big and intimidating. They're bigger than paper wasps. But they will emerge during that late, during that, it could be in June, and they're going to miss the periodical cicadas, so just in general. But pretty interesting. It's a different biology, of course, but the cicadas down there are pretty much have, besides their loud noise, a lot of them, there's really no defense that they have. So now the periodical cicadas. There's a lot on here. I gave my presentation as a preview to my family yesterday. They groaned, but they were kind of fun. One gene is Magicicada. So there's some periodical things occurring with cicadas, but not at this level. There's maybe across the world that I've read, but this is pretty much an eastern United States phenomenon, which is pretty amazing. So that's where that gene is Magicicada. They thought it was magical when they first appeared. And some of the history tied with this, and when European settlers came to the world, they thought they predicted war if there's a W down in their wings, or peace. But during that time, there's always war, so you think, these come out, there's going to be a war. So there's interesting with this history that people have not really seen. So there's 7 species. There was 6. What I've read recently, there's 7. They're black in color. That's I think a clip art of it. Reddish eyes, orange wings. They're often smaller than the annual cicadas. But they come out in spring. So it depends when we hear. So they can come out from late April to early June. It depends on the geographic area. It could be all the way down to Alabama, all the way up to New York. But what I've read, they emerge when soil is 7 to 8 inches deep, and when that reaches 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and in an area they'll come out over a few days. So periodic cicadas are best known for their highly synchronized life cycles. So we're hearing a lot about this, of the cicada apocalypse, and other things too. Just reading up, they don't like to use the word swarm, as we'll save that for honeybees and other things, but we think of emergence. Broods can reach 1.5 million per acre, so incredible amount. And there's going to be some other numbers which can be pretty exciting. And they do masting, which is predator satiation. They're all coming out, you're coming in a group, and then some are going to get eaten, some are going to die, but there's going to be enough that survive and reproduce. So this is highly synchronized, and you think of masting that may occur, you think of wildlife benefits like acorn trees or pine trees, they'll go through masting, that the conditions are just right and they make a lot of flowers, and acorns may not be as predictable in a sense, but you flood the environment with acorns, all the squirrels can't eat them. But this one is just tied to those numbers. So the males sing, the chorus builds, they attract females. Each species has its own song. I've not learned those yet, but it's pretty exciting to see, or actually to hear. Different species often sing at different times of the day, but from the early morning to different times of the day there. Female leave chorus after mating to lay eggs. And as soon as I learned one thing, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole that, I don't know if she just mates once or more, there's all these different questions. Like, think you know little, then you're just, digging deeper is pretty exciting. Then you just have to stop to do the presentation. Adults often die in a few weeks. Females can lay 20 to 30 eggs per puncture. Eggs hatch in 6 to 8 weeks and the nymphs fall to the ground. So I do want to show, it's only a 4-minute video, but I couldn't have done better than David Attenborough. And this is on his Planet Earth series. So it's about 4 minutes.
After 17 years underground, creatures are stirring.
Nobody has a voice like him.
Yeah, you love his voice. So.
The nymphs of the periodical cicada have been biding their time. Now they march like zombies towards the nearest tree and start to climb.
Yeah.
At first, there are merely thousands, but soon more than 1 billion swarm all over the forest. The biggest insect emergence on the planet is underway.
I think he sped it a little down north.
Do they have to have an orchestra?
Yeah, right.
The music adds to this.
Yeah, this suspense.
They invade the upper branches where they climb out of their external skeletons and assume their adult winged form. At first, they're white and soft, but they have until dawn to complete their transformation. After an absence of 17 years, the forest is now overrun by cicadas.
Just about a week, but it's
The adults are clumsy and very edible. For turtles and other inhabitants of the forest, this is a feast they're lucky to see once in their lifetime, and they gorge themselves while they can. Times have never been so good. The cicadas have no defences and virtually offer themselves to their attackers. The stream of insects is so relentless that soon all the predators are full to the point of bursting.
can't be together. Oh
And still the cicadas come. With the predators overwhelmed, the survivors can achieve their purpose. After mating, the adults lay their eggs, and then their job is done. In just a few days they will all die, and the forest will fall silent. The cicadas here will not be heard again for another 17 years.
So if I was British, I could say cicada, but I'm gonna just say cicada. I'm not as fancy, but it's Planet Earth series with David Attenborough. It's a pretty neat video. You just probably Google that and find it. So there's a lot more to come on the presentation as we get into the periodical cicadas. I mentioned it's you take one and there's just so many different interesting things to look. You really can't see everything up close, but as they go through the life cycle, kind of be similar to the annual dog day cicada, except as nymphs they're going to be underground for a longer period of time. All the way up at 1, there's a courtship. The male sings, the female flicks in response. 2, the female can saw a crevice, about 20 eggs she can lay in a little crevice there that she makes with her ovipositor. We look at cicadas in a moment. You'll see if they have a pointed into the abdomen, that's going to be the female. 6 to 8 weeks later, the eggs hatch. They'll fall to the ground, so I guess there's probably not mortality. That if you're a teeny tiny little nymph, you could probably fall 40, 50 feet, you know. That's probably never been studied, but who knows. They'll live either 13 or 17 years, it depends on that species. Then they will use their powerful front legs to dig out that 13th or 17th year. Then they will molt, come out as adults, they're sexually mature, they have their wings, and males are calling. So it's pretty amazing. We'll look at some of the details associated with it.
How do they get nourished for 17 years?
That's what's they're eating the xylem sap. So part of it, why they think it may be so long, that they're eating that sap that's not very nutritious, so they're growing very slow. Some may have to do with predators, but if you're going to eat that, only you're going to eat, I guess, the sugars and not a lot of protein, that just causes that to be slow in their growth.
How do they acquire whatever they...
Yeah, they have that proboscis there, and the fine little roots, they take that and they'll find the root of that tree, and they'll suck those juices out.
So they're attached to something that's
right.
providing... Okay.
So I don't know if they'll find so there's so many different things to look at. I don't know if they're going to be on the same root for their whole life, but that root's going to be getting thicker, so they have those legs, those we call the fossorial, they're digging, so it'd be interesting to know, I guess you'd have to set that up in the lab, whether they're going to stay on that root for their whole life, but that root's growing and probably getting more woody. I would imagine they would have to move. So I'm going to show you a lot of maps, so hopefully you know your states. Most people do. But this is not the broods that are going to emerge this year. In blue, these are all the 17-year broods that occur. There's 12 that are... On 12 different years, there's 12 extant broods, and this is where they are at. But they're all put together. This is not what's going to emerge this year, and neither is this one. But this is all the 17-year broods. So we had some emerge in 2021, and some in 2024. But this is all put together. That's 3 species. So 17 periodical cicadas, the 17-year periodical cicadas in the East United States. So you get into the Great Plains, they're pretty much done. Here's the 13 years. They're more southerly in a sense. That's all the 13-year broods. There's 4 species. Of the 13-year broods, there's only 3 broods that are alive, extinct, that exist. So you've got to keep track the 17 and 13-year broods, the different Roman numerals of the broods, and the 7 species. So this gets complicated. But this right now, this is where all the 17-year broods are, but they're not going to all merge at the same time. 4 of the 13-year species, then 3, but a brood just means they are emerging on that year. That's what that means. And you can have the same species. So the 13 years are much more southerly, and you can see it doesn't match up perfectly. I grew up in the state of Illinois, but look how that kind of cuts through, and the reds will kind of go through here. There is overlap, but there's not a lot of overlap. Illinois is going to have a great year because we're going to learn one of those broods is up here. We're going to have some in Kentucky, but just to keep this straight, you got broods, you got species, and those broods are on different years. So brood years are not species, but the brood years are when they're coming out there. But expecting timing years of emergence. So it's interesting, the 17 and 13 are prime numbers. So here's one theory that but science has looked at, that they're emerging in the larger numbers, and those being prime numbers, they've kind of got the jump on any type of predator. So if a predator is, let's say they're on a 12 cycle instead of a 13. You think about the numbers that go into 12, 3, 4, 6, and 2, they would end up hitting their cycle. kind of like 17. Nothing goes into 17, nothing like 13. So it may be an evolutionary arms race that they'll come out. In most animals that experience that 17-year brood is never going to see it again. Like, I don't know, what's the average lifespan of a cardinal or a, probably not 17 years in the wild, but they're probably, if they feed on one, they're not going to have it again or even expect it. But sometimes they get off schedule. So we're going to look a little bit, one of the theories is how do they count the years, but it has to do maybe with the sap going through the trees. But if we have a really warm snap in the winter, then it gets cold again, they may miscount that as a year because the sap will go up and down the tree. So you can get a push, which means some are off schedule. They've miscounted. We're trying to look at that. The calculators are wrong, and that's some of the really interesting biology. And when they don't emerge on schedule, these are the words they use: spurious, off cycle, straggling, acceleration. And some of that push may actually get how we got some of these species to begin with. So there's a lot of maps. These are all the 17 ones in the 13 years, and we're going to look at different pieces associated with it. These are the same maps. I just have them up here again. Any two specific brood combinations of a specific 13-year brood and a 17-year brood will only co-emerge every 221 years.
Oh my goodness.
So we're going to look at the one of the 2024. Why is it special for this year? But 13 times 17, I never really knew the math until this. Now it's 221. I usually can't do that in my head. So these are still all the broods there, and we're going to look at the individual ones associated with it. So here are, you got to look at your Roman numerals. You don't have to see all those numbers.
Oh, I see.
There are 12 17-year broods. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're going to learn no 11 and 12, but 13 and 14. So we have brood 1, it emerges 2012, and a different brood 2 will emerge in 2013, brood 3 in 2014. So they're on different 17 years. So you can actually be in Kentucky in an area and you have some 17 years emerge here, and then the next year in the same area, but there are different cycles. They're not the same ones. Here within the 17 brood, we are, I had to study my Roman numerals to keep it straight, 13. So it's brood 13, which is a 17-year brood. That's 2024 right here. Our 13-year broods, there's 3, and it starts at 18, but it's not up here, but it's 19. So Roman numerals 1 through 17 were saved for the 17-year broods, and the 18 above go with the 13. So there's no 18 years, so we start with 19, 22, and 23. We're going to learn about some things are missing. So to keep that straight, the 13-year brood is 19 that comes out in 2024. Those are the two ones that are coming out. So the 13 of the 17-year brood and the 19 of the 13-year brood.
Sure.
It's crazy as we look at this.
That's amazing.
So on that,
Well, I remember because they were calling people in 2021, when that brood came out, they kept calling it the X brood.
That's right.
yeah,
And
the
people
X.
said, no, it's a 10.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah, it's
10.
the X brood.
They-
So
they
that
were-
2021 came out in Kentucky. That's that X brood.
Yeah.
And we're going to look at the 2024. Last they came out together was 221 years ago, 1803, and our president was Thomas Jefferson. And Kentucky was probably all
Not-
forest.
nothing. With lots of cicadas.
A lot of cicadas. So why is 2024 special? I got this book. It's like $30 from Amazon as I Google different things. Actually, it was published in January this year. It's a really neat book, The 2024 Emergence of the Periodical Cicada. All these maps are up there. So I guess I never read Tale of Two Cities. I never read my books that are supposed to. I'd rather read science stuff, but it starts as The Best of Times or something like that. So the periodical brood cicadas 13 and 19. So why is it so special? It's the Northern Illinois brood, which is 13, it's a 17-year, and the Great Southern Brood. So blue I'm saving for our 17 years, and red for our 13 years. So other 17 and 13 year combos have appeared relatively recently, but not these above two. So the first, I was actually doing wildlife work in central Missouri and Columbia in 1998. And a little bit west in Missouri, we had a brood emergence and then this Great Southern Brood. So it wasn't these two same broods, it was this red brood and a different brood that emerged in 1998. But those two are not going to emerge again for another 221 years. So I was like, what was the big fuss? And we'll understand about why is the big fuss about these two. There's another combo of 13, 17 was a 2015, but it wasn't these two broods. This Great Southern Brood has emerged now, but then only one other time since 1998. So here are the broods. There they are. It's smaller than all the broods there. The Northern Illinois, the 17-year brood, they're going to be coming out in Chicago, into Iowa, into Wisconsin. And the Great Southern Brood, which is a good amount of the whole range of all those, the 13-year cicadas. So these 2024 broods do not greatly overlap, but may co-occur in small woody patches, but it may be small because it may be here a little bit. You're going into Iowa, you lose those, then you know, good part of Illinois. And I actually grew up kind of all between those. I don't remember periodical cicadas growing up, but right that dividing line. But I'm a little bit north of Springfield, Illinois, the capital. They say that you can maybe see both, but you know, Steve could probably identify them in the hand, but I'm not, most of them I would like to identify all those different ones. You can look in the book, okay, this is that 13 year, this is that 17 year, they're all black and orange, but there's characteristics that you can see in the book. You really want to figure out what you're looking for. But if you know you're in Kentucky, more than likely it should be the Great Southern Brood, but there can be patches that may not be on the map. And there could be some that are merging off schedule from a different one.
Micah,
Yeah.
is in the Great Southern Brood, all those red dots, that still represents three species?
Yeah, probably 4 species.
4 species.
Yeah, so within those broods, I think 2017 has 3 species, sorry, the 17 brood has 3 species and the 13 has 4. They should all come out this year.
Okay.
But not all broods have all the species. Go ahead.
So in the areas where they overlap, is there ever any crossbreeding going on?
I don't believe so. I think they do not, but some of them look in evolutionary history, they had to come from, you know, from ones originally millions or thousands of years ago, whatever we're looking at, but they don't think there is based on the morphology and also the song differences. Yeah, the song, so yeah. So that, you know, there could be some hybridization. So like we look at, you know, if they could try mating, you know, right on that range in Illinois, the black cap meets the Carolina chickadee, and understand when they breed, they make hybrids and they just don't do as well. So that keeps that dividing line. So I don't think there is, but, you know, I'm learning more all the time. So those are the 2 broods, and that's much smaller than all those, the broods that are out there. But it's still monstrous as we're looking at. Yeah, so why is it so special? These are the 2 of the largest broods. There could be emergence of 1 trillion periodical cicadas.
1 trillion.
1 trillion. So I think at this day we always say million, billion, trillion, and it's hard for us to grasp. And I just looked at something. 1 million seconds will be 12 days. If I have that right, yeah, 12 days. So we could sit here for 12 days and count 1 million seconds. 1 billion seconds is 31 to 32 years. So we'd be here for a long time. A trillion seconds is 31,710 years. So it's just like we say million, billion, trillion, we throw those numbers around. You know what, a trillion to a billion is what, 4 degrees of magnitude. I guess 4 zeros bigger. But, you know, I've not lived 2 billion seconds yet, but I've lived 1 billion. but none of us will live a trillion seconds, 31,000 years. So that puts in that perspective to imagine what a trillion is. For us to start counting, it would take us 31,000 years, 700 to count to a trillion. And they think across this there could be a trillion periodical cicadas. So that's what it is, what's so amazing, but it's only be certain patches in Kentucky. So you may have to go to some other areas, but if you get some places in Kentucky, you'll still have a lot, but you probably won't have the 17 and the 13 year. And all 7 of those species will merge in the same year and won't happen again until 2037, but it won't be those 2 same broods. So that's in 13 years, so that's when the southern brood's going to go again. So we're looking at all the kind of little piddly broods and the different ones just in general. So we had all those blue dots for the 17. Now we're just going to tease apart and think about those just for a moment. Brood 1 came out in 2012. Brood 2, 2013, 2014, 2015. You'll kind of see it. That's like was on that chart. So 2012, you got some Virginia, Tennessee, West Virginia, kind of really small. Brood 2 up the eastern seaboard. Brood 3, a little far out west. It's not from Midwest, Iowa, Illinois. Brood 4, this is the one that I saw in Columbia, is right here. That's what I saw in '98. So this 17-year brood came out with our 13-year brood 26 years ago. So that's when they appeared together, but there's not a lot of overlap on those, and that's the farthest west. So Laverne, you got them in Oklahoma, not out to your panhandle, but then you got them in Texas, Kansas, things like that. So that should be the farthest west we have, and that's brood 4. Brood 5, Ohio, West Virginia. Brood 6, North Carolina, the Carolinas. Brood 7 is pretty interesting. It's a little patch up in New York. And some may have all the species or may not, but the brood is just that year that they emerge. Brood 8, in western Pennsylvania. Broods 10, or like 9 and 10, we have here brood 10, and there's an interesting article by Stephen Hahus that you may know. Here's his part of his master's work. Food habits of Blurine and Promiscus, Microtus. I told him I was going to put that up here. Maybe Steve should be doing the presentation, but he got his data in '87 in Kentucky. Through University of Arkansas, some of those earlier years when that came up is what he gave me some of the information. And Steve probably could give more information, but what I read in his article, Blurina, shrew, Permiscus, either deer mice or white-footed mice, and Microtus or voles, that it may be supplemented or they would eat that instead of the arthropods. I mean, Steve, do you remember on some of that of like,
A long time ago.
Yeah, a long time. But it's a pretty interesting article as I was looking associated with it. Guy here, McLean County, said millions of there where he was sampling those. But that's the same one we saw in 21.
It was brood 10.
Yeah, brood 10, yeah. And we call that the brood X, but brood 10. And it's, I don't really see him as much in Owensboro. I mean, do we see him much in the Rudy Mines or?
Yes, Ben Hall's area.
Yeah.
And West Davis County out there, before you get to Maceo.
Okay.
There's an area out there that'll deafen you.
Yeah. And it's weird how it's patchy, because some could be lost, like with forests being lost, that females can lay their eggs and they better have a tree there, because if that tree's not there for 13 or 17 years, they cut it down, those cicadas will be gone.
They come out and go.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to know, like Kentucky, yeah, what was the forest like and all those. So here's interesting, where are broods 11 and 12? They're not on that list. 12 is spurious. That means if anything appears in that year, that's not a regular brood. So if they appear during that time. But brood 11, which is XI, which is not up here, has basically extirpated, or that brood is called extinct, and it's not been reported since 1954 in Connecticut. But there's really no brood 12. If something shows up, something, if they get off schedule, they could start making those broods, but right now, that's that spurious one they're talking about.
I don't remember.
All right, here's our brood 13, which is a 17-year cicada, that northern Illinois brood we talked about earlier. Hear about the one in 2008, that's brood 14, kind of patchy through Kentucky. These individuals from the book from Cincinnati, 2008. You kind of see it's patchy, maybe it was continuous at one period of time. So 2008, 2025, I always have to make sure I do my math right. So. This is now we're into the 13-year broods. This is brood 19, emerges in 2024, what we saw before. So broods 20 and 21 are not on there. So 20 is spurious. That means if anything appears that's not on a schedule, so there really is no brood 20 at this time. But brood 21 has not been reported since 1870. It was in Florida. So pretty interesting. I don't know where in Florida, but for the most part, they really don't reach down that far. So broods could disappear and they could appear. Go ahead.
Micah, I'm amazed at this boundary line between Illinois and Indiana. Is this because Indiana is all farmland with no trees?
Well, Illinois is kind of the same way too.
Well, I mean, what's the deal?
Yeah, because you've got the Wabash here, but then the Wabash cuts into Indiana, but that's just an artificial geographic line. I don't know if some land use, but growing up there, central 2/3 of Illinois and Indiana, it's mostly like Iowa. It's great crop field.
Yeah.
So I don't know about colonization. I know if it had something to do with that, that's some good questions, but I think it colonized more from the south. They came up through the river, like the Europeans and habitation, because you think of the first Indiana cities, but I'm not sure. That's a great question.
How deep do they go when they go into?
I don't really know. Steve, you know how deep they go?
I don't know what she said.
How deep do they go, the cicadas?
Down below the freeze line, whatever that is in the area that they are
Wow.
living in. Not as deep
I just
as
wondered
the
if
farther
they
north you
might,
go, the deeper they'll spend their
Right.
time.
that human behavior might interfere with some of this by plowing up, digging up, whatever.
And climate change, a lot of things that they're
Climate
thinking
change,
about.
yeah.
But I'm amazed that Illinois has so many. We're the prairie state, and most of we have 100th to 1% of tallgrass prairie. There's trees in Indiana and Illinois, but I remember growing up, just crop fields, north, south, everything's in these nice sections. Just amazing that we still have all the cicadas because, Illinois is one great big cornfield sometimes, but the river valleys, but pretty interesting on those. So that's that first 13-year brood. This is the 22, the Baton Rouge brood, has two widely separate geographic areas. So down here, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Mississippi, but also northern Kentucky up to Cincinnati. Both have the same three species, but they're missing Magicicada neotradescum, which is more in this area. And we're going to look at the species. I just kind of look at the tip of the surface associated with those. And the Mississippi Valley brood, this picture actually from this book came from Evansville, comes into the tri-state in 2015, and we'll see this in 2028. So we can still see periodical cicadas in Kentucky year after year. They're just different broods. And keeping track of them all.
Effingham?
Yeah, the Evansville, but then probably Effingham. And actually that may be,
Too north.
it may be a little bit north of Decatur. Like DeWitt, there's actually this little park and near my mom's house when I grew up that they have them there. So it's probably Decatur, Champaign.
Yeah, Micah, brood, 2015, there was a huge emergence in the Big Halls area from that brood.
Okay. Because I was expecting, I didn't get over Ben Hawes during some period of time, and
2015,
yeah, it's just pretty amazing to look at those. So that's the 13-year broods. We have a few more slides. So trying to look at species. So species are different than broods, different than the 17 and 13 years. So there are 4 species of the 13 years and 3 species of the 17 years. Most of the broods, like if a 13-year comes out, most of the species are represented, but not all. And with 17 years, almost all those species coming out with a few exceptions. So they have a certain range, but the range can kind of be big so on. Though they can be divided into 3 species groups. So here's the 13 year, here's the 17 year, and there's actually grouped not by the 13 and the 17 year. That we're going to look on this next slide, that these across these, there's groupings that may evolved and kind of split apart. So the next slide may help with that, as I have the same graph. So the periodical cicadas can either have 13 or 17 years, but the life cycles are not necessarily monophyletic. So that doesn't mean all the 17 years came from a common ancestor and all the 13 years. So that's not what actually occurred. So they're thinking,
It's insane.
with purple, these two 13 years, and actually this 13 and 17 year are closely related, this 13 and 17 are closely related, and these, and you can see how they did the naming with them, Septendisum, Neotradisum, Cassini, or Tradecassini, and Cassini, and Traducula, and Septentadrucula. I guess Tre being 13 and Sept being 7. So it's pretty phenomenal that they may be closer related, but then this group is closer related to then this group. So that monophyletic, it's called homeoplasis. So it's just like bats, birds, and insects have wings. But we know from evolution that bird wing is not the same thing as a bat's wing or an insect's wing. They all can fly, but it doesn't mean that trait basically indicates a recent common ancestor. So kind of like the 13 and the 17 years don't necessarily indicate that. So that kind of really blows your mind of like, okay, if there's that push, did the 13 maybe come from the 17? And if there's a push of the 13, why aren't there 9s? But there's numbers that go into 9s. So I just scraped on the surface of how maybe they came from common ancestors. But you go back to all of these 3.8 million years that they do have a common ancestor. But 13, 17, 13, 17, those purple indicate more common ancestors than through those groups. So I just kind of piecing this together today is pretty exciting. So that deals with, as we're looking at species. So this is not necessarily, this is broods, but also at the species. So this green up here is Septendisum, or Decim, which is a 17 year. And this is a 13 year, which is Tredisum. So, but anyway, they believe that this 13 year evolved from this 17 year. And what's going to be interesting, you can see Tredisum in all of these, that this 13 year now overlaps with this 13 year. But it came from that 17. So all the Tredisums, we'll go back to this previous slide, that's these two and this one here. So that these two, the Septendisum and the Intradisum, then this other one came later, the Neo being new. So with that coming new, they've actually shown reproductive character displacement. So this is that old 17 year and Septendisum. That's his call that he does right here. This is that 13 year, and this is the Tredisum. The call's a little bit lower on when they're graphing that sound. So this is a 13 year, that's a 17 year, and they can call kind of at a similar level. They're not going to be always synced up together. But when this new Neo-Tredisum evolved, it evolved right here, not overlapping. So how that happened or not through spatial separation or something else, but it now overlapped with the southern And where it overlaps with it, it evolved this reproductive character displacement. So when this neotradisum doesn't overlap with the tradisum, it is calling at a similar level. But when it overlaps, it has evolved to call higher, so they can hear those differences. If they all called at the same level, it would be a problem. So where they overlap, this neotradisum will not call at that same level, it's elevated. So it's character displacement, so they are not competing in basically the same register. Because if they're all calling, that could confuse, they're mating with and be responding to different individuals they should be mating with, because the babies and the biology won't work on that. So it's pretty amazing, they're all related, and somehow that brood changed, this part of this older one turned into a 13-year, and now it's a 13-year cicada, and it has to have a different call than these other 13, so it's not competing. So it now can be somewhat similar to the 17-year. It doesn't have to evolve that reproductive character displacement because they're on a different time. So, go ahead.
So are the classifications determined by their calls?
I think that's going to be part of it. They're going to be doing. They're going to use genetics. They're going to use morphology. They're going to use a lot of different things to put them together on that classification. So they'll, they can kind of see. You can see within the names on those. So the calls may be relating to it, but they're going to be all.
It's one of the.
It's one of the characteristics.
They consider.
Yeah.
For classification.
So then DNA is always usually the best to see, but that's just pretty amazing that it overlaps with one, and it can't be calling the same register, because then within the course, so they'll call it a different register at a different time of day, so they're partitioning that calling register. So the scientists that did that, pretty amazing, and I spent a lot of time on University of Connecticut's website, so maybe they might win the NCAA, but because I'm not a big UConn fan anyway. So I'm almost finished, so I'm going a little long. The periodic cicada fun facts and questions. So this fun fact, they predictively emerge, large numbers, but there's complex biogeography. I'm just trying to tease it all and keep it together. But they're shaped by spatially and temporal isolation. So they can be spatially separate. The 17 years are much more northern, the 13 more southern, but also temporally through time. So there's interesting things in biology, temporal and spatial. How do they count the years? What I've kind of read before on some, maybe the flow of the xylem or the nutrients in the tree. But remember, that can get messed up if they have a warm or a cold. And also, how do they keep track of those years? It's like, okay, I'm the cicada in the ground. The xylem changed and the food changed. That's year 1. Wait a whole other year 2, 3. Then it could change. It's like you get to year 8. It's like, what year is it? You're underground. But for the most part, they do really well. But there can be mistakes.
They hold their little finger.
Yeah.
do they?
And it's how to then in that little the insect brain or ganglia. How do they? Okay, it's been 17. It's ready. I'm ready to come out. Yeah, the driver's license. And if there's a push, why is it 4 years? Going 17 to 13, and there may be pushes from 13 to 9. I don't know. This periodicity of the 17-13 may be shaped by glaciation. You think of all the great crop fields of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. The glaciers came down. They think some of the temporal effects maybe have to do with the glaciation that occurred. We didn't have a lot of glaciation that maybe occurred in Kentucky. I think I saw that coming in down there. The glaciers weren't in Kentucky. We used to have those meets and bounds and all those hills. The periodicity could be shaped by predation. Anything on a 3, 4, 6 year life cycle or something, not going to hit that 13 or 17. I think prime numbers will show up. But they say if those are so important, why are not other insect species doing this? But in such a long period of time, if you and I ate xylem sap, we probably would not grow very fast either. But there's some of the discarded or dead ones there. all the references, you know, it was kind of, thank you for inviting me, but it was, I learned a lot, but I'm no by means like the periodical cicada expert, but it's just fun to learn, and now I really want to get out, you know, later this year and see them, so that's what I got. Thank you.
Now open the